Every prepper stockpiles fuel, but eventually they all run out. Your house was engineered to lose heat the moment you stop paying for it. For 2,500 years, civilizations built homes that regulated temperature using nothing but physics. Using stone, earth, sunlight, and geometry, kept people alive without furnaces or gas lines. In 1972, one architect proved the same physics still works today. This is the thermodynamics of a house that heats itself forever. Number one is the physics of thermal mass, so let's start there. Once you understand it, your current house starts looking like a very expensive liability. Every material has a property called specific heat capacity, and it measures thermal absorption before surface temperature rise. Water and stone have high specific heat capacity, meaning they soak up enormous amounts of energy before warming noticeably. Rammed earth and concrete behave the same way, storing heat across their entire volume. Wood has a much lower capacity, and air has almost none at all. When sunlight hits a stone wall, that energy doesn't just warm the surface it touches. It spreads through the full mass of the material distributed across every cubic inch of the wall. A 12-in rammed earth wall stores enough solar energy by sunset to stay warm for 12 more hours. No heating system, no insulation, no fuel of any kind, just mass doing what dense material does naturally. It holds thermal energy and releases it slowly on its own schedule. This phenomenon is called thermal lag, and it's the entire foundation of passive building design. The peak temperature inside a thick wall lags several hours behind the peak temperature outside the wall. In a well-designed passive structure, heat absorbed at noon is still radiating into the living space at midnight. The wall charges like a battery during daylight hours and discharges that stored heat into the room at night. No fuel burned, no electricity used, no system to fail when the grid goes down. Think of it like a cast iron pan versus an aluminum pan on a stove. The aluminum heats fast and cools the moment you cut the flame. The cast iron takes longer to heat, but stays hot long after the burner dies. Your wood frame wall is the aluminum pan. Fast to respond, zero thermal memory. A rammed earth wall is the cast iron. In a survival scenario, that difference is measured in hours. Now, compare that to standard American wood frame construction, which is built around a completely different strategy. A typical exterior wall has an R value of around 13, which measures resistance to heat moving through the wall. That figure tells you how well it slows transfer, but says nothing about how much heat it can store. R value measures resistance, not storage. And those are fundamentally different physical mechanisms doing completely different jobs. Insulation slows heat loss, but once your furnace shuts off, stored thermal energy drops to near zero immediately. In a grid-down scenario, that design becomes a survival liability within a few hours of losing power. Number two is 2,500 years of working proof from civilizations that got there first. Here's what makes thermal mass so compelling from a physics standpoint. It wasn't invented once by a single culture. Every civilization that ever built in a demanding climate independently discovered the exact same principle. They all used different materials, different climates, and different languages to describe it, but every single one landed on the same conclusion. Dense walls store heat and release it on a delay. 500 years before Christ, Socrates described what he called the ideal house to his students gathered outside Athens. Oriented facing south, he told them, and let the low winter sun pour directly into the front rooms. In summer, the sun climbs higher and the roof overhang blocks it before it can heat the interior. No fire required for either season, just geometry and orientation doing the work. His student Xenophon wrote it down in a text called Memorabilia, still the oldest surviving document on passive solar design. The physics it describes is 2,500 years old and has never stopped working. 500 years after that, Roman engineers scaled the same principle to a nearly impossible size. They called their system the Hypocaust, and it heated entire public buildings using a single fire. The stone floor was raised on hundreds of small brick columns, creating a hollow plenum running beneath the entire building. A single fire at one end pushed hot gases beneath the floor and through hollow channels inside the walls. The stone absorbed that thermal energy for hours, storing it deep in the mass of the material. When the fire died, the floor stayed warm for hours more, radiating heat steadily up into the space above it. In 216 AD, Emperor Caracalla opened a bathhouse covering 27 acres, holding 1,600 bathers at once. The entire complex was heated and maintained by a single fire feeding energy into stone. Bathers walked on warm floors while snow fell on Rome outside the building. Meanwhile, in Persia, builders solved the opposite problem using the same physics principle. They kept ice frozen through a desert summer using structures called Yakhchāls. These were dome buildings with walls 6 ft thick, built from packed earth, lime, sand, clay, and goat hair. The massive walls soaked up brutal desert heat during the day and slowly radiated it back outward through the night. Underground chambers stayed cold enough that winter ice survived through summer in temperatures reaching 120 degrees. Researchers measured one surviving Yakhchā in Abarku, Iran, and recorded a 70-degree temperature difference between inside and outside. The interior held near 40 degrees, while the surrounding desert hit 110. No electricity, no refrigerant, no moving parts, just wall thickness and physics working together. The structure is over 2,000 years old and still standing today. Medieval European longhouses built stone walls 3 ft thick that acted as slow-release thermal batteries. Japanese builders used south-facing screens and dark earthen floors to trap and hold solar warmth through cold seasons. Every culture, every continent, every climate arrived at the same conclusion about dense material and stored heat. The physics doesn't change based on what century you happen to be building. And number 3 is the Trombe wall, and its elegance is almost hard to believe. It has no moving parts, no electrical components, and nothing that can break or run out. The mechanism is this: dark masonry, 8 to 16 in thick, sits 1 in behind south-facing glass. Sunlight passes through the glass and strikes the dark masonry wall surface directly behind it. Dark color maximizes solar absorption, and the glass traps accumulated heat in the narrow gap between them. That 1 in gap isn't arbitrary. It's the precise distance needed to create a convection loop inside the cavity. Without it, the glass acts as a heat sink and pulls stored energy back out toward the cold exterior. With it, warm air circulates between the glass and wall, driving heat deeper into the masonry. The wall soaks up thermal energy all day long, storing it deep in the masonry mass. By evening, the stored heat begins radiating through the wall and into the living space on the other side. Vents at the top and bottom allow natural convection to circulate warm air into the room continuously. Warm air rises through the top vent and into the room, while cool air is drawn in at the bottom. The whole system runs on sunlight and gravity with no mechanical assistance required at any point. A properly sized Trombe wall can supply 60 to 75% of a home's annual heating needs. The materials it requires are glass, dark masonry, and 2 vents. That's the entire list. It can be retrofitted onto any existing south-facing wall for a few hundred in materials. No licensed contractor is required, and no permit is needed in most jurisdictions. In a world where fuel is permanently unavailable, that level of simplicity is not a convenience feature. It's the difference between a shelter that keeps functioning and one that slowly stops working. Number 4, the Earthship, 50 years of real-world data. In 1972, an architect named Mike Reynolds drove into the desert outside Taos, New Mexico. He started building homes that the construction industry would spend 5 decades trying to stop. He called them Earthships, and they are the most thoroughly tested passive thermal mass structures in the modern world. Reynolds packed used tires with rammed earth and stacked them like bricks to form exterior walls 3 feet thick. That's pure thermal mass built entirely from materials most people send to the landfill. Every home was oriented south with a greenhouse running the full length of the front wall. The north, east, and west walls were burned directly into the surrounding earth using ground temperature as permanent insulation. Soil at 6 feet deep holds between 50 and 60 degrees Celsius almost anywhere on the planet year-round. That gives the buried walls a free permanent thermal buffer across 3 sides of the entire structure. The documented results across 50 years are extremely difficult to argue with. In Taos, outdoor temperatures swing between 10 and over 100 degrees across the year. Inside an Earthship, the interior holds steady between 65 and 75 degrees throughout all of it. No furnace, no air conditioner, no gas line, no electric heater, 0 energy bills for over 50 years straight. Now, consider what that means during a week-long winter power outage. A conventional wood frame home loses roughly 1 degree Celsius of interior temperature per hour with no heat running. After 72 hours, you're below 50 degrees inside, which is hypothermia territory for sleeping adults and dangerous for children. An Earthship in the same conditions holds within a few degrees of its baseline the entire week. It draws on the thermal reservoir stored in 3 feet of earth and tire mass around it. That's not a comfort difference. That's a survival window measured in days versus hours. The Department of Energy confirmed passive solar homes use 50 to 80% less energy than conventional construction. The University of Bath found rammed earth walls outperform insulated timber frames for temperature stability across seasons. Those walls hold heat longer, release it more evenly, and handle temperature swings that conventional insulation can't manage. In 1991, a physicist named Wolfgang Feist built the first certified passive house in Darmstadt, Germany. He founded the Passive House Institute in 1996 to create a rigorous scientific standard for the approach. Today, more than 60,000 certified passive houses operate worldwide, using up to 90% less energy than conventional buildings. That figure isn't projected or theoretical. It's measured and verified across thousands of structures in dozens of different climates. Reynolds himself has built more than 3,000 Earthships across the globe, including in Haiti, Puerto Rico, and Sierra Leone. Those homes heat themselves, collect their own water, and grow food in integrated greenhouses inside the structure. They operate in communities where no power grid exists and no energy bills are remotely possible. Number 5 is why you've never heard of any of this. The global heating, ventilation, and air conditioning industry is worth $240 billion annually. The United States residential natural gas heating market alone exceeds $60 billion every year. Every passive solar home means one fewer furnace sold and one fewer air conditioner installed. It also means zero monthly revenue from a family that owes nothing to anyone for warmth. That arithmetic explains why this never made it into mainstream construction or building education. After World War II, America needed millions of homes built as fast as possible. Developers subdivided land for density and road access without any consideration of solar orientation. Natural gas was cheap and furnaces were cheaper, so builders ran gas lines to every lot. They installed forced air systems and sent homeowners a bill every month for the rest of their lives. Building codes were written around that model and eventually became the mechanism that kept passive alternatives out. Those codes required specific ductwork, specific mechanical ventilation, and specific heating capacity. Passive homes didn't need any of those things, but the codes required them anyway. Then, in the 1970s, the oil crisis briefly cracked the door open. Energy prices spiked, fuel became scarce, and passive solar construction gained real momentum for about a decade. Architects were building it, homeowners were demanding it, and the physics was proving itself in real structures across real climates. Then oil prices collapsed in the early 1980s, and the industry pivoted hard. Cheap gas returned, the urgency evaporated, and the brief window of mainstream interest closed almost overnight. The knowledge didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared when the economic pressure driving it went away. Reynolds fought New Mexico building departments for more than 3 decades straight. His permits were denied, not because his structures were unsafe, but because the code forms had no category for them. The forms assumed every building needed a heating system, so a building without one simply didn't compute. New Mexico finally passed a special law in 2007 just to allow him to legally build these homes. That was 35 years after he first proved they worked. The mortgage system finished the job from another angle entirely. Lenders and appraisers value homes by square footage, countertops, and finishes, not energy performance. An Earthship with zero heating costs still appraises below a conventional home with a $400 monthly energy bill. The system was designed to reward dependency and make self-sufficiency nearly impossible to finance. The market simply had no financial interest in letting the physics succeed. The most dangerous shelter you'll ever occupy is a house designed to need something you have to keep buying. You now understand why thermal mass is the most overlooked concept in survival construction. But there's a second shelter problem most preppers never consider, and it's more immediately lethal than heat loss. An underground structure that holds perfect temperature will kill everyone inside within hours if you get the ventilation physics wrong.